Thank you. Good morning, everyone. From vaccinations to climate change to election results, truth-seeking, truth-finding, and truth-telling have become seemingly a fool's errand. The path to factual veracity, fidelity to logic, and evidence-based principles is increasingly difficult to traverse. Some, in despair, see no cognitive or socio-emotional GPS to guide us forward. Like Dante in the Divine Comedy, we find ourselves nel mezzo dei cammini di nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura. Una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita. In the middle of the journey of life, I found myself astray in a dark forest where the straight road has been lost. Increasingly, it feels like we're lost denizens in an empire of post-truth, a term for describing a do-it-yourself sensibility where facts and their representations are entirely secondary to emotion and personal preference. But this isn't Pascal's emotions, where the heart knows of reason, for which reason has no reason. The emotions here are the emotions that flow from the reptilian brain, that which is most fundamental in human cognition. As Justin reminded us in his framework for this very important endeavor here, post-truth is a neologism. Apparently, it didn't exist prior to 1990, and now it's skyrocketed in its use. In his pithy, on-point, and clear presentation, Lee yesterday surveyed the topography of this dark forest of post-truth. He reminded us of the clear and present danger when arbitrary power moves to evade cognitive and socio-emotional consent and puts a detour sign bypassing the entire project of persuasion, a theme that returned in Ana Marta's intervention on the technocratic and populist undertows, threatening to drown the practice of democratic citizenship, an ever fragile practice. A practice that rests so on a carefully informed deliberation, as Jane articulated in her presentation. Marty's thesis then outlined the precursors to the current malaise in his historic role taking on the real cancer of the tobacco industry's architecture of lying, deceit, and misinformation. He took us to the front seat, the front line, to witness what the President Stefano yesterday called Machiavelli's dirty hands in politics. I think the dirty hands was the frame that Sartre gave in his interpretation of Machiavelli in politics. Marty shared with us an invasion of big money to muddy waters, the higher guns, the vulgar reframing of the project of science to sow disorientation, cognitive fatigue, and as we say in Spanish, el quién sabe, quién sabe, quién sabe, who knows? As we are seeing throughout the world, the destruction of truth is not an abstract or benign development. It is calculated. It's engineered, made by design and for profit, as very clearly and eloquently articulated by the various presentations yesterday. Today, as Monsignor Marcelo, Bishop Chancellor, tasked us to do, we turn to a Bavarian ethic of responsibility. What are the pathways out of this dark forest we find ourselves in. Indeed, if we hope to win the existential battles of our time, pandemics, unchecked climate change, the undermining of democratically elected government, we need to first begin the project of rescuing truth from the multiple threats to it. Truth-seeking requires rules. Let's call it a grammar, the systems and structures that make language and communication possible. Yet there is no universal grammar of truth. Put another way, the pursuit of truth evolves in different ecologies, and thus its genome has been differently constituted each time in very distinct ways. Not all truth-seeking and truth-telling are equal. Some truths are paradoxical. Being Argentine, I'll share with you, Leo Messi, the genial Argentine soccer player, is right-handed but left-footed. This is very paradoxical, biologically speaking. Other truths are conditional. Nothing travels faster than the speed of light, except in a vacuum of perfectly empty space. And a lot of truths are banal. We know those. As scholars, as scientists, as practitioners, as administrators, we are especially concerned with the project of advancing truth, a project that flows from historically constituted scholarly disciplines which share cognitive schemas and agreed upon practices. In the academy, we speak of the truths of physics. Heat always flows from a hotter to a colder body. Neurology, compulsive addictions, this was the secret of Facebook, compulsive addictions flow from the activation of the mesolimbic dopamine system. That's how you become hooked. Anthropology, the rise of civilizations always flow from the invasion of agriculture. Linguistic truths. The letter P in the Romance languages becomes an F in the cognate Germanic languages. Thus, pes in Latin, pied en français, pied in español, becomes fus in German, foot in Swedish, foot in English. By the way, this is Grimm's law. The Grimms collected fairy tales, not to collect fairy tales, they collected fairy tales to do linguistic analysis of the changes, morphological, of the various versions of the tales in the various Indo-European languages. That's my anthropology lesson for the morning. The very life that animates the work, as Marty commented, of the modern research university, the DNA, is the pursuit of truths. But that has always been contested territory in academia, and we're better off because of it. Few truths are immutable. Exhibit A is during the last generation, with the completion of the Human Genome Project, it's opened an entirely new truth-seeking avenues, fundamentally changing our understandings of the genetic pathways of neurological disorders. In other ways, academia has at times gone down dead ends. The grande idée that rigorous methodologies, be them statistical models, social surveys, anthropological thick descriptions, can lead to understanding, to explanations, the articulation of nomothetic general principles or more peculiar ideographic laws, is entirely rejected in some academic quarters as either, and I quote from the great Mel Spiro, one of the most important anthropologists of the 20th century, as either arrogant, misguided, or futile, if not all three. In the words of Spiro, many of these streams of thought, as Lee suggested yesterday, arrived on shores throughout the world as part of a French wave associated with postmodernism. If I may call it a kind of a new French disease. At the heart of the French turn is the claim that the very architecture of scholarly study encodes the dark workings of power, domination, appropriation, and other malignant ends. In this framework, then, truth-seeking is not simply misguided and futile, it is violence by other means. Anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, others, while mindful of the role of power in truth-seeking and telling, have managed to ride the French wave without letting its undertow entirely drain the scholarly enterprise. The eminent Harvard psychologist Howard Gardner explains that, quote, it would be catastrophic to give up the effort to approach and, whenever possible, establish truth. Suppose, I'm continuing to quote from Professor Gardner, suppose we were to take the postmodern view to an extreme, for example, to state that truth is simply an expression of power, that truth cannot establish with any validity, or that truth is a vacuous concept. Under such circumstances, we could scarcely function at all. End of quote. Nowhere is Gardner's warning more evident, here is Exhibit A, than in politics, where social media swamps breed misinformation, bad behavior, as the exemplary papers yesterday by Chris, by Jennifer, and by Marina articulated. But politicians, as President Miam suggested, have always had an ambivalent relation with the truth-seeking and truth-telling. Ana Marta quoted the immortal Hannah Arendt, writing of the horrors of another era.
Yes, say 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm done. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I'm not going to then quote, but I will quote it because it's so beautifully written. Quote, no one has ever doubted that truth and politics are rather on bad terms with each other. We now turn, we have seen the assault on truth in the domains of climate change and in the domains of the vaccine and the pandemic. We now turn to solutions, a possible GPS out of the dark forest of the post-truth. I will send you just in the other.
Please do.
So thank you, and I'm sorry, Monsignor, that I took a little bit more time.